Welcome now one of those responsible up on Capitol Hill for supervising U.S. trade policy. He is Republican Senator John Thune of South Dakota. He sits on the Senate Finance Committee and is the Senate Majority Whip, the third-ranking Republican in all of the Senate. He comes to us today from Capitol Hill. So, Senator Thune, thank you very much for being back with us.
Thanks, David. Nice to be with you.
We've just been talking with Sean Donnan about these trade deficit numbers that came out this morning. It's certainly a cause of concern for the President of the United States, who's concerned about it. Are you worried about it?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I think that those trade numbers go up and down, but I think what it points to, David, is the broader issue where our trading relationships are concerned, and that is that we've got to be opening markets. And it's hard to be opening markets when you're in these trade fights with some of these countries and you're imposing a lot of tariffs. Those obviously invite retaliation. So in the end, what we need here, if we're going to continue to see the economy grow and expand and probably see that trade deficit go down, are real intense efforts to get some of these markets open, and that means, of course, China, obviously EU, Japan. There are a lot of potential bilateral trade agreements that are being considered and discussed right now, but those need to be put into place and concluded and open up those markets to our products, and I think you'll start to see that number change in a positive direction.
And of course, we know the President and his trade representative, Bob Lighthizer, are working hard on that China issue in particular. Do you have any sense, do you have any information about how far along we are? There were reports earlier this week that we're reasonably close.
Right, and I met last week with Ambassador Lighthizer, and we hear from him on a regular basis as well as from other members of the administration's team when it comes to trade, and they're optimistic that something is coming together with China. Obviously, we have lots of outstanding issues with them, intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer. There are a lot of very serious issues, and I'm glad this administration is taking those seriously and working really hard to try and get a better deal. Obviously, with China, the challenge is going to be enforcement, but I hope that they can ink something here soon that would at least get us to a place where some of these markets start to open up again. We're particularly sensitive in the Midwest. Agriculture, 65% of our soybeans go to China, and that market, for all intents and purposes, is shut down. So it's really important that they start closing these deals. They seem confident that's going to happen, and I hope they do.
So let's talk about some of that sensitivity, starting, first of all, with the Midwest, with South Dakota. What do you hear from your constituents? Because there are some reports, there were two reports out, actually, over the weekend, that actually there's some real economic effect in the United States of America because of these tariffs.
And I think that's true. Most of our farmers and ranchers like the fact that the president is taking on China and some of these other countries around the world who have been taking advantage of us and using, abusive in terms of our trading relationships and trade practices in the past, but they are also people who are very pragmatic, and, they're starting to feel real economic impacts from this. It's getting harder and harder to get operating loans. You're seeing more and more farmers with these commodity prices staying where they are, and a lot of the export markets, as I said, very much closed off because of the tariffs, that you're seeing a lot of economic anxiety and stress, and that's going to continue, and that's why I think it's pretty important that they show forward progress, the administration that is, on trying to get some deals done, because right now, at least in farm country, it's they want to support the president on this, but they're also feeling real economic anxiety as a result.
And I think, Senator, many people would say the farmers have been pretty patient with the president as a practical matter, and he's reached out to them without a doubt. How much patience do they have? I mean, give us a sense of the time frame. I'm not asking for a deadline and when they have to have the deal, but are we talking about weeks? Are we talking about months? How long can this go on before there's real dissension, both among the constituents that you have in South Dakota, but also, for that matter, among the Republican caucus up on the Hill?
Right, both are starting to feel the pain, and the economic pain that's being experienced by a lot of farmers and ranchers is real. And as they go in to try and get operating loans, planting season is upon us here. If these, last year they were spared a little bit because a lot of them forward contracted. About half of our crop last year was forward contracted at prices that were above the cost of production so that they could break even. This year there's a real concern that's not going to be the case, and so these lenders are trying to work with them, but in many cases, if they're not cash flowing, if they've got negative cash flows, they're asking these borrowers to put more equity on the table and to liquidate some of their land and to be able to get operating loans, and that they can do that for a little while, but not for very long. So it's a situation where farmers are patient, and they understand it's a long game, but at the same time, when people start losing their farms over this, the economic impacts become very real. And I think that's why there is a sense of urgency attached to these negotiations.
Yeah, we all are focused on China, but there also is the European issue pending. And reportedly, at least, Ambassador Lighthizer will be meeting with his counterpart, Cecilia Malmstrom, today about the EU negotiations. You're from the South Dakota. I'm from Michigan, a different part of the Midwest. In Michigan, we're worried about cars. How concerned are you about the possibility of yet another trade war opening up with Europe?
Yeah, I worry about that, and in the discussions that we've had again with the administration's team, I think it's really important because they're talking about all these potential forms of retaliation. I know in the world of agriculture, we've always been bothered by the fact that the European Union imposes non-tariff barriers, a lot of sanitary and phytosanitary, what we think are bogus artificial issues to try and protect their agricultural economy. And so we want to break into that, but obviously it's going to be a challenge. There are a lot of other issues and other sectors of the economy that are impacted by the trade relationship with the EU. So I hope they can work through that. I mean, they should be our best trading partners, and obviously there's a lot at stake, and for both parts of the world, for the European countries as well as for the United States, to try and get a deal that works for both economies. So I hope they can fight through this and get to close a deal.
So if China and Europe weren't enough, we also have Mexico and Canada, and we thought that was sort of past us, the new form of NAFTA, the USMCA. At the same time, we hear some rumblings on the Democratic side. Are we going to get a ratification of that new deal?
I hope we can. I hope Democrats will vote for this. There's going to be implementing legislation that's going to be submitted at some point. We're still awaiting the ITC review, which was supposed to have been done by now, or at least pretty soon, and I think it's going to be delayed, obviously, because of the government shutdown. But once we have that, and that's called for in the Trade Promotion Authority under which this agreement was negotiated, but once we have all that information, hopefully we can move the process forward, we can get to a vote, and there'll be enough Democrats in the House of Representatives to pass this. I think it's really important that we get it done. There's a lot riding on it. It's good for agriculture. We concluded that it was at least a status quo or improvement over what we had with NAFTA, and so the ag economy, again, is very interested in seeing this thing get done. But it will require a vote in the House, ultimately in the Senate, and I don't think at this point in the implementing legislation that they can do much to change the underlying agreement, but there will be Democrats, I'm sure, in the House who will try and exact more demands from the administration on this. But I just hope that we can see clearly to realize how important that relationship is. Canada and Mexico are two of our biggest trading partners. They're huge markets for American agriculture, and that deal also needs to get done, and get done soon.
It's not trade per se, but we have this issue pending up there on Capitol Hill involving the president's declaration of an emergency involving the building of the wall down the southern border. It appears right now from the reporting that it looks like the Congress will pass that resolution on both sides, both the Senate and the House, to really interfere with that declaration, although there's a question about overriding a veto. How do you count the votes? You are a whip, after all.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that the leader made it clear over the weekend that in the Senate, at least, the resolution will probably pass. It's also passed in the House, but not with a veto-proof majority, and so I think that they will not be able in the House to override the veto. So for all intents and purposes, I think the issue is the president's going to be able to move forward, subject, of course, to litigation, which I think is inevitable. They'll be in the court for probably some time on this. But, we're going to vote on it in the Senate. That vote's probably going to occur sometime next week. We have a lot of our members that are still evaluating, looking at this, concerned, obviously, about the precedent that this would set for a future Democrat president who might have priorities that they don't agree with. But I think we're going to have the vote. Senators are going to go on the record at some point on this, and I know we all agree on one thing, and that is that there is an emergency at the border. The numbers bear that out. The facts bear that out, and it's something that needs to be addressed. The president and his administration need resources to do that. That's on an issue on which all, I think, Republican senators at least agree. The question is, what's the best way to resource it and to get it done?
Senator, thank you so much for your time. We always benefit from hearing from you. Good to talk with you. That's Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the majority whip in the Senate.